How do we imagine post-pandemic futures for theatres? The COVID-19 crisis, with its enforced and painful suspension of established ways of making and watching theatre, has offered opportunities to reflect on what we do and how we do it, and on what might and might not return. In an essay penned in the first months of the pandemic, Bruno Latour suggested that we take advantage of the enforced suspension of most activities to set out the inventory of those among them we would like to see not coming back, and those, on the other hand, that we would like to see develop. For Latour, the pandemic is an opportunity to contest global systems of production in order to avoid a return to business as usual. In online meetings, on social media, in publications, theatre makers have been active in questioning the status quo of theatrical production and highlighting existing issues within theatre, including precarious working conditions, exclusionary practices, structural inequalities, ecologically ruinous resource use. And they've been engaging in radical dreaming about what might be possible. Alongside this, the wholesale transfer of areas of cultural activity online has offered numerous test cases and opportunities for the development of digital media in theatre and performance. The proliferation of online work has revealed approaches to event streaming and highlighted areas where understandings and skills might be enhanced to allow future developments. The limits of digital platforms and practices have also been made evident, while the possibilities of the live and the synchronous have been expanded. And in and amongst all this, the desire for return to some sort of stability has sat in tension with a realization that any such stability is tenuous at best. The pandemic is, if anything, a crisis that is revealing the severity of the broader ecological crises we face, environmental and social. So how do we reimagine post-pandemic theatre and performance in ways that might encourage the emergence of new performance forms and enable us to create more sustainable futures? This presentation focuses on the Ever After project, a conceptual design-led pilot project conducted in collaboration with National Theatre Wales, as a way of addressing this question. Conceived in April 2020, Ever After has sought to inform and stimulate new practices in the production and staging of theatre in the era of COVID-19 by offering propositions, questions and methodologies for thinking about the future, and by developing creative tools and operational strategies for potential application within the company. Initiated by director and performer Mike Pearson, the project has been developed in collaboration with artist and director Mike Brooks, artist, broadcaster and director of the Institute of Making at University College London, Zoe Laughlin, and me, a lecturer at Aberystwyth University with research specialisms in space, located practice and architecture. In the first part of this presentation, I'll introduce Ever After and discuss its methodology. In the second part, collaborators Zoe Laughlin and Mike Pearson will offer an extended reflection on a key aspect of the project, investigating our relationship with materials and objects. And then, in the final section, I'll outline the proposals that emerge from the first stage of Ever After, and trace the project's emerging concern with future thinking, decision-making and sustainability. Like arts organisations worldwide, National Theatre Wales, or NTW as they're often referred to, have wrestled with the significant challenges of how to operate in radically changed and changing circumstances. As social distancing and lockdowns were introduced in March 2020, NTW cancelled plans for live performances and moved other projects online. But NTW's particular identity, its operational structure and its history make it an ideal partner for future-oriented inquiry. Founded in 2010 as Wales English Language National Theatre, NTW are a non-building based company who have forged a significant track record of located and context-specific productions across the length and breadth of Wales. Rather than operate a touring model, NTW work project to project with different artistic teams in specific locations and with specific communities. The company is comprised of a small Cardiff-based staff in production, administrative and communications roles. And with the remit of being a revenue-funded organisation and a sector leader for theatre in Wales, NTW facilitate large-scale commission projects while also running programs in artist development and community collaboration. Digital innovation has been a key focus, with past NTW productions involving live-streamed or hybrid elements, and the company facilitated an online social network. The appointment of Lorne Campbell as artistic director in early 2020, alongside other new senior figures, occurred just as the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted national life. NTW have therefore been in a unique position organisationally to ponder the possibilities of future theatre making, to engage in a dialogue over past activities and future aspirations, to reflect on and reassess assumed but currently suspended practices, and to act as an exemplar for the development of new kinds of performance practice in Wales. In assisting NTW to assess the likely impacts of COVID-19, we sought to imagine and propose transferable principles and models for new approaches. Methodologically, we structured the project as two parallel strands of inquiry and creative thinking. One strand was the research group, and the other a self-selecting group of colleagues from NTW, convened by Head of Production David Evans. Influenced by Latour's suggestion that we describe or set out an inventory of practices, the research group identified 6 dimensions of performance, where the impact of COVID-19 could be examined. These were assembly, relationships, materiality and design, space and architecture, techniques and expression, and production processes. For each dimension, the research group compiled an accompanying set of open questions and reference materials and supplied these to the company. Each dimension was allocated a fortnight, and the research group and NTW colleagues met separately on a weekly basis. The questions each week had an inbuilt progression, asking firstly for reflection on pre-pandemic operations and practices, then on current operational realities, and then inviting consideration of forward-facing initiatives. As examples, we asked, among other things, for assembly, in what ways can you imagine adapting and altering the nature and places of the gatherings you organise or are involved in? For relationships, in what ways post-pandemic can you imagine spatially positioning and presenting yourself in relation to others in all the phases of your work? For materiality and design, what do you do with the blood, sweat and tears? For space and architecture, in what ways can your production practices go to meet others, gathered either formally or informally, rather than them coming to you? For techniques and expression, what means of seeing and listening might spectators need to be provided with to maintain and enhance their capacities as receivers of theatrical meaning? And for production processes, what are the kits, apparatuses and tools NTW will need? Reference materials were supplied in the second week of each dimension as case studies, often drawing on Pearson and Brooks' own history of production with NTW, history which includes The Persians in 2010, Coriolanus in 2012, and Iliad in 2015. We also supplied imagined scenarios. For instance, in reviewing performance documentation of Coriolanus, we asked the company and ourselves, if NTW were to stage this production now, what key physical relationships could stay the same, and what would need to adapt and or change? The research group focused on notional and conjectural ideation, and the material was then deposited into a shared online folder at regular intervals, creating a form of asynchronous dialogue. Responses from the NTW group informed and fed into research group deliberations, and vice versa. The parallel nature of the inquiry meant that the research group never directly examined or critiqued NTW operations or productions, but supplied frames and prompts for critical reflection. NTW colleagues used these to reflect on the range, scale and location of the company's past achievements, and consider how strategies and techniques from the company's history might equip them to address the challenges of a COVID-19 world. They noted the advantages afforded by the company's inherent flexibility and the disadvantages of its commitment to mobility and travelling, especially given likely impacts upon the distribution of production. They reflected on possible responses and solutions, suggested alternatives to administrative practices housed in single office locations, and importantly, identified this as a moment to develop and state best processes of sustainability. The weekly discussion, idea sharing and reflection that Ever After facilitated amongst colleagues at NTW was a key strand of the project, and it serves, I think, as a model for effective collaboration between research, education and industry, where the sorts of feedback mechanisms and tools for critical reflection developed in academic and educational settings might be productively applied to facilitate company development and to connect operational and aesthetic considerations. A concern with the material realities of theatre and its entanglement with objects, materials and things formed a significant thread running through the weekly research group discussions. Early in the pandemic, the major concerns about fomite transmission, of the virus being transmitted via contaminated objects, led us to consider the logistics of objects and touch, and to imagine performances project design where scenography might entail forms of careful planning around the circulation and handling of objects. But as research developed, an understanding of the significant role of airborne transmission of the virus, our focus shifted towards the status of material in performance and its many implications. For this next section, I'm going to hand over to two other members of the Ever After team, Mike Pearson and Zoe Laughlin, for their reflections on the ways in which the pandemic is transforming our relationship with materials and objects, both on stage and in life. Located in Cardiff, Mike offers reflections at a scale of 1 to 25, with models and images supplied by John Rowley, while Zoe is in the Institute of Making at University College London. And this would be a good time to make sure you have your 2 squares of chocolate handy.
We dwell in a realm of things, natural things, manufactured things, elemental things, machinic things, technological things, sonic things, odoriferous things, raw things, cooked things, insubstantial things, nebulous things, indeterminate things, objects and phenomena, matter and stuff, solid, liquid, gaseous, spectral, caught in a flux of immaterial, intangible things, ideas, concepts, beliefs, myths and attitudes. We are never alone. We are always accompanied by things. They are beside us, on us, in us, constantly passing through us. We are perpetually mixed with things, not only with their forms and fabrics, but also with the forces, densities and intensifications they give rise to, embody and release. Things that are present in their own right, that have autonomy, with unique and discrete characteristics and properties, not only of mass, dimension, shape and surface, but also of vibrancy and vitality, at scales and speeds that can eclipse human enterprise, that have agency, that have distinct powers and capacities, that create effects, that make things happen, sometimes intentionally, on purpose, that produce impacts, sensational, visceral, emotional, and perceptual on us as we encounter them, as they continuously cross our path at different velocities with varying degrees of percussion and repercussion, that offer affordance to our physical functioning and labours, to our journeyings, to our engagements, helping us get along, enhancing our efficiency and effectiveness, but that also block our progress, that hinder our designs, that restrict our capacities to communicate, to live unimpeded lives, to survive, constraining us, disbalancing us, confounding us, colliding with us, sometimes jeopardizing our well-being, that make demands, that oblige us to modify our behavior, to accommodate and to reckon with them as they shape our movements and compromise our abilities through hazard and stress and overload, that once animate, in motion, can be unruly and uncontrollable, disorderly and disruptive, that do things like melting, rusting, burning, metamorphosing, accumulating, coagulating, evaporating over periods of time beyond our measure, sometimes with unforeseen and spectacular outcomes. And perhaps as theatre builds its scenic worlds, it offers an opportunity to contemplate and appraise the role of such things in human life. a chance here to ponder our relationships with things, what they do to us, we to them, they to each other, and what they might yet do as they provide for our wants, fulfill our desires, and extend our ambitions, and also what they do as of right, how they themselves perform. To demonstrate the quiddity, the whatness, the qualities of things, and the heseity, the here-ness, the individuality of things. To appreciate how they make a difference, altering the course of events from local to global in their influence. It is, after all, a minute organism that currently defines our world, real and theatrical. We are intimately bound up with things, with their processes of becoming, their persistence and their decomposition, entangled intentionally and accidentally in ways momentary and enduring, in linkages of dependence and of antipathy, some of which we recognize, others that we're indifferent to, still others that we're barely aware of. Imagine then the world as a living, throbbing confederation, or as a heterogeneous assemblage of things fluid and solid, visible and invisible, and of the energies and consequences triggered by their collisions and syntheses, their frictions and amalgamations, thing to body, body to thing, body to body, thing to thing, in which human and non-human coexist in precarious balance, in a kind of symmetry. Now, just as theatre constructs a scene in which we take everything that appears to have purpose and meaning, please picture a familiar domain, a landscape, a city street, your kitchen, or just look around. What is the range and extent of things there? Where do they come from? What brings them there? And what do they bring with them? What are the attributes that make them significant? What are all the things doing? What is their function and how are they functioning? How are they arranged and how do they articulate one with another? How are they making things happen? How are they prompting your actions? How are they producing effects, generating affects on you, for you, in spite of you? Questions that now seem rather quaint or archaic from a former time and place, for a microbe, a barely visible life form that may be lurking anywhere, now sets the conditions for human activity worldwide, far beyond your scene, curtailing our transit, determining how we distance ourselves and move in relation to others, and who and what we touch, regulating how we cleanse ourselves, prescribing the use of the same prophylactics, masks, visors, gloves, universally, in order to intervene, to protect us from it and us from each other, demonstrating the connectivity of things.
Hi there, welcome to the Institute of Making. So I'm currently in our materials library. Down that end is our workshop, but this is a palace of process. But today it's also a materials theatre. And I'm going to show you some of my favourite things, tell you some stories of materials, what they get up to and what we get up to with them. And I'd like to begin here. This is a piece of malachite. This is copper ore. So copper as a metal that we might recognise it in the form of this spoon, is kind of orangey, shiny metal that's an elemental metal. So it's a metal that appears on the periodic table. It's one of the simplest forms of stuff. But actually, copper is not copper is not copper. Once we get it in the world, it has many different properties, and it is a material with many different sort of faces to it. So in the process of having to extract it from the ore, you have to burn it with a lot of carbon to rip the oxygen away, to then leave behind at the bottom of the slag of the smelter the orange ore. But then it's constantly in a process of wanting to return back to its ore. So it oxidizes and will eventually go green and turn back to copper ore. And in itself, this is a made thing. This has gone through a geological process of mining and of compression and heat. But then we put it through a process of mining and extraction and then smelting to make it. And when you make things out of copper, you order copper and it kind of comes in this powdered form that is in some respects a new raw material because you can then use it to make other things. But again, is a made thing. These are tiny spheres of powdered copper. But once it's in a specific shape, it has specific properties and behaves in specific ways. And in fact, once you make a copper powder, it becomes something incredibly flammable. If you were to take a piece of copper, just a great big ingot of it, and put the blowtorch on it, well, it wouldn't set fire, and it actually wouldn't even burn, to be honest. It would just be a kind of hot piece of metal. But the minute you make a powder out of it, it becomes flammable. In fact, aluminium does. A number of things become far more flammable because you just have a lot more surface area. So there's just going to be the powdered form introduced to a flame to create a fireball. But also there are powdered metals around us all the time. I'll introduce you to this object next. So this is the catalytic converter of a normal kind of car that's driving around on the streets today. This object is kind of at the last point, just before the exhaust that you would see popping out under the boot of the car. And if you were to cut it open, it contains two filters. So these are a ceramic object which have got thousands of little holes. Not sure if you can quite see, but the exhaust passes through these holes. But these ceramics are impregnated with platinum. And that platinum is very reactive to certain nasties in the exhaust. So as the exhaust passes through the filter, the platinum reacts, and it extracts those nasties from the exhaust, essentially cleaning it a little bit and filtering as it leaves the engine. But that platinum, as it gains the reaction and becomes kind of heavier, eventually it can't react anymore and drops off and falls out of these filters. And so the dust of our roads in cities and towns throughout the world are covered in this microscopic platinum dust. And it's so valuable as a material that actually there's a company that exists that go around hoovering the streets for that dust to then process it and extract platinum from the dust on the road, which shows you not only the value of platinum, but also the inefficiency of the mining process. It's actually worth their while gathering up that dust and processing it. But it's not just industrial processes that kind of get to grips with what materials can be like and what materials do. We process materials all the time, and we're surrounded by materials, and they mediate our world. And there's a very easy way in which I can show you the difference of approaching what you do with the material, actually changing what it's like. So hopefully you've got with you some chocolate. What I want you to do is you should have two squares of the same chocolate. Pop the first one in your mouth and start to chew. Okay, so you're now applying a mechanical process. You're masticating, you're releasing saliva, and that saliva is starting to mix with the chocolate, crunch it up. It's softening, it's starting to melt in the heat of your mouth. But as you chew, you release more saliva, and the enzymes from the saliva are getting to work on the sugars and the fats in the chocolate, and you're tasting it, and it's delicious, and you're sort of finishing up, and you're like ready for a next bit. Because chocolate, it is an amazing material. This is highly engineered to make you go, yum, and have another bit. Like, it's a perfect blend of fats and sugars to make something incredibly delicious that melts at body temperature. So now I want you to process the second piece in a different way. I want you to put it onto your tongue, close your mouth, and do not chew. Do not crunch it up. This time I want you to let it melt at your body temperature and let it become a different material in your mouth. I want you to experience that change of state from solid to liquid. Because as it starts to melt, it starts to react with your taste buds, and it starts to release an aroma, and you're starting to experience different properties of the material. And it's really difficult at this point not to want to chew, but don't, and just allow it to sit and melt and become different stuff in your mouth. So although it's the same chocolate, just that act of processing it differently, either chewing or sucking and letting it melt, actually enable them to become different materials and generate different experiences. But how we process materials and the unmaking of them is really important. So this is a blob of high density polyethylene. This is a plastic that would be described as a thermoplastic, because when you heat this up, rather like the chocolate, it melts rather than burning or being set fire to like the copper in powdered form. So this doesn't burn or char, it softens and melts and can then be reprocessed and turned back into other objects. And it began its life as a milk bottle. So if you get milk from the supermarket, it often comes in plastic containers like this. And this is a really high value plastic because actually, not only is it very recyclable, it's white. And white plastic is very precious because once you've dyed stuff, that's kind of impossible to reverse. So once you melt dyed things together, you sort of end up with that plasticine brown going on. Even if it was blue plastics mixed together, you're never going to get the same turquoise. You're always sort of losing quality. So the white plastic is the most valuable in the recycling chain because not only can it remain white, but it could be dyed other colors if you wanted it. So this is the stuff they want. But when your mixed recycling comes into the recycling plastic center from the domestic waste streams, it's just a big mess and amalgamation. So what it does is it goes directly into a massive shredder, shreds the plastic up, shreds it up, and it turns it into little confetti-sized kind of cornflakes of plastic. And then it takes them up on a huge travelator conveyor belt to the top of this huge building. So it's over 5 meters high. And then it lets the plastic fall in a giant waterfall of confetti plastic. And that waterfall travels past an array of cameras. So there's an array of cameras looking at that falling plastic. And below the cameras, there's an array of like little air jets. So when a camera sees a piece of white plastic, it sends a message to the air jet below it. It tracks it and tells it to blow. So it goes track, blow. So you have this waterfall, cameras, air jets, and separating out the plastic, because at the bottom of the waterfall, you have a pile of coloured plastic and then a pile of white plastic that's been separated. But in this country, the most common milk that people buy is semi-skimmed. And semi-skimmed comes with a green lid, signifying this is semi-skimmed milk. So chances are, out of all the coloured plastics, if a little bit sneaks through and gets into the white, it's more often than not a little bit of green plastic. So that's why this blob is kind of a weird sludgy green colour, because this is a moment where the white plastic got contaminated by a bit of green and they had to stop the machine and purge it out. This is the purge result blob, then start it all up again. So this is now sort of essentially good for nothing. This has spoilt the white plastic, has sort of ruined the process. They've got to clean it all out and start again. So the recycling centre thought, why are they doing these greens? Surely it'd be better if they were white. And they got all the supermarkets together and said, look, could you not do white lids? Because that would really help in the recycling process. It would keep the value of this object really high in the recycling food chain, so to speak. No. The British people, they need their coloured lids on the milk, because that's how they know if it's semi-skimmed. And they're like, but well, maybe you could just do it like a sticker. Like, well, no, we can't do a sticker. Anyway, it is a sort of madness. What they managed to get them to do is reduce the amount of dye. So this is now a lid of the new milk containers. They're actually brighter, but this contains less pigment. So there's less density of the contaminant than there is in this. So it's better, but it isn't as good as if it were white. And actually, it would be perfectly possible to legislate and make it so that all single-use plastic has to be white. But when it comes to it, the power of packaging, the power of selling things often comes down to decisions that don't take into account the end of the life of the object. And so I think there's a role in leadership and materials and the making of things and the unmaking of things that needs to consider all of these nuances. And I think I'd like to just end by bringing the discussion to the kind of thoughts of the bigger picture and climate and our responsibility, and just do a small demo that brings together two materials in very different states of environmental condition to generate a climate in the materials library here for you now. So I'm boiling some water. This is getting rapidly to 100 degrees Celsius. And in here, I have liquid nitrogen at minus 197 degrees Celsius. So very nearly a 300 degrees difference between the two, okay? And when I bring the two together, this is going to instantly create both solid, liquid, and gas simultaneously and generate a snow cloud right here in the workshop. So boiling water. liquid nitrogen, and cloud.
As in life, so in theatre. One casualty of the current emergency is the stage world itself, as it adapts to new constraints, necessitating the reassessment of creative and technical practices, leading to new spatialities and choreographies of habituation for its dweller performers, and to new modes of production and aesthetics of organisation, requiring new approaches to the handling and arranging of scenic materials, of things that have become potentially pestilential as they meet bodies and as they cause bodies to meet bodies. There is now a need to take account of all that's operative in each dramatic setting, actually and potentially, not simply representationally, as a matter of mortal concern. And as theatre changes, so it might induce a greater acknowledgement of symmetry and of connectivity in perceiving relations between humans and things. As in theatre, so in life, compelling us to appreciate the entire composition of a context and its enmeshed components, ever in process of change, the ecosystem of bodies and substances in their circulations and symbioses, their leakages and flows, imagining new or renewed relationships and shared potentialities, in order that we might capitalize sympathetically on the assets available, demonstrating respect and responsibility for environmental features, devising and enacting viable strategies of sustainability, and above all, acting transparently and accountably, leading us to question just how heterogeneous, how diverse any particular situation and assemblage actually is, which people, what things, what factors are included and embraced within its purview, what is apparent and apparently impactful here, and what in our biases and ignorance do we exclude, disregard, discard, render surplus to requirements, and what here is simply beyond our ken, and who really cares? Then to attend to those things finite, damaged, that can no longer exist without our intervention, protection, maintenance, and conservation. What kind of fixing solutions are required? And what needs leaving well alone? Ultimately, unsettling our anthropocentric perceptions, dismantling the human object dichotomy, and challenging us to think with and through things, virally, in tracing the transmission and proliferation of our ideas and actions and their repercussions for others, and fungally, in operating in decentered webs of people and things in which small moments of local encounter can have widespread outcomes in life and in theatre.
In this final section, I'll outline the research group's proposals and briefly trace out some of our broader visions and imaginings. And accompanying these are a series of images from a large-scale intermediate work by research group member Mike Brooks and Rosa Casado, called The Sky Was Clearer in Those Days. Staged in 5 episodes in Madrid in 2019, the work used the act of dismantling and breaking down a used family car into its smallest possible elements as a means of reflecting on the scale and extent of global human activity. At the end of Phase 1 of Ever After, we offered a series of propositions to National Theatre Wales, emerging from the interdisciplinary nature of our inquiry and our experiences of theatre making. These were offered as ways of coming to terms with creating theatre and performance in changing circumstances, within and emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic, but also within broader ecological crises. Our first proposition was that the company conceive of every production as an assemblage of people, things, technologies, texts, ideas, regulations, gathered and mixed in different relationships and to varying extents in order to generate meaning and effect in a particular context. Secondly, we proposed that the company picture every production as a work of project design, in which all elements from communications to risk assessment to questions of sustainability are included in the conceptual process, and inform and temper creative ambitions, choices, and compositional practices from the outset. Making performance by trial and error in a rehearsal room may no longer be the most useful practice to employ. Thirdly, we propose that a brief is set for every production that includes expectations for social distancing and hygiene, attitudes to sustainability, parameters for the employment of scenic and technical equipment, and requirements for access. Next, we propose that the form of performance, as well as the subject matter, are adapted according to context. Performance need not, in its duration, modes of address, and relationship with an audience, attempt to replicate the conventions of the auditorium. We propose that the scale of performance also be adjusted according to context, working from the very small to the very large. In an age of pandemics and rapid ecological change, performance need not, in its scale, extent, and fixed location, attempt to replicate the scale and conventions of the auditorium. We proposed that it's unnecessary to demonstrate dramaturgical plenitude on every occasion. A project's basic components, text, action, scenography, soundtrack, technology, can be employed alone or can be composed in different combinations and in varying ratios in space and time according to desire and necessity in a particular context. We also proposed that it's unnecessary to engage everything performers can do, conventionally combined as character-driven acting, on every occasion. The use of voice and physical expression and engagement with media and technology can be present in different modes and with varying degrees of application according to desire and necessity in a particular context. And we proposed that it's also unnecessary to make sites resemble auditoria. Rather, use the spatial and cultural context to inform dramaturgical form and suggest appropriate modes of communication. We further proposed that the company should enhance connectivity between performers and audience and extend the reach of performance through audio-visual technology. Performance can be in one place and many places simultaneously. And finally, in seeking new models large and small for taking performance to audiences and bringing audiences to performance, we propose that the company should consider historical and international theatre forms, such as Japanese No, and alternative and experimental theatre practices, durational, peripatetic, landscape, installation, autoteatro, intermedial. Beyond these propositions, the research group generated shared visions of how we might reconfigure practices of production and theatre aesthetics, both in the midst of conditions imposed by the pandemic, but also in the ever after. Reflecting on the intermedial dimensions of Pearson and Brooks' 2012 production of Coriolanus for NTW, and considering the expanded possibilities for event streaming that have emerged over the past year, we imagined how the co-presence and position of multiple audiences, the live in-person and the live digital, might be managed in forms of hybrid performance, where streaming might serve to supplement the live rather than merely broadcast it, offering digital audiences distinctly different framings of the live event, and where intermedial elements might simultaneously magnify and intensify the dramatic impact of that live event. Performance might now happen in multiple places with and for different groups of people simultaneously, and the experience of simultaneity might itself become a new form of presence. Such intermedial hybridity requires conceptual and aesthetic integration rather than operating as an add-on to the live in-person event. It has implications for what sort of performance spaces might be needed and the sorts of infrastructure these spaces would require. These are notions well suited to address the dispersed demographic of Wales. Spatially, we imagine sets of performance conditions like those found in public space, where we have to negotiate each other's presence and find ways to self-organise. Zoe's concept of a threshold of responsibility, in which performance space exists as minimal shelter between the more codified rules of the auditorium and the less codified rules of the landscape, somewhere between private and public, encapsulates the sort of negotiation between individual and institutional responsibility that might be required to manage the risks associated with gathering together. Large post-industrial performance spaces seem most amenable to accommodate gatherings of these sorts, or perhaps agricultural sheds and barns. Perhaps, after Cedric Price's Fun Palace, theatre architecture might be conceived as more inherently transformable. Or after Bernard Shumi's design for Parc de la Villette, the spatial dramaturgy of performance could be reimagined as structural grids of point, line, built structure, of paths and moments of intensity. One shared vision was of the dematerialization of theatre architecture and its replacement with what we called an infrastructural auditorium, an infrastructure for seeing and hearing within which an audience might be located and oriented through performance design. We also imagine performance as multi-temporal and multi-scalar, adaptable in form to prevailing conditions. Might we work more consciously with scale to confound anthropocentric assumptions by evoking the extremely small or the vast and marking interconnectedness and enmeshment? Imagining performance as assemblage that offers new kinds of affordance, ergonomic challenge, mediation and entanglement to performers, in which materials remain embedded in their complex systems of production, processing and distribution rather than being used up, and where sustainability is defined through these processes rather than the potential for recycling or reuse. The Ever After project continues. At the time of this symposium, we are undertaking a second stage with NTW, focused on sustainability and future thinking. As the company articulates a new mission statement and a set of values, we're considering how these statements might be translated into a decision-making framework, and how the propositions and visions from the first stage of Ever After might be tested and explored using planned NTW productions as case studies. Here our concern with sustainability is meant in broad terms, encompassing specifically environmental concerns, but also encouraging the development of future-oriented conceptual, strategic and creative responses. As the rate of COVID-19 infections drops across the United Kingdom, and the percentage of the population who have been vaccinated rises, the resumption of live performance seems imminent. But how we think about the future and its possible scenarios needs to go beyond considerations of how quickly restrictions are lifted or how willing audiences are to return to theatres. We need to prepare now for future pandemics and for the other inevitable ecological and political upheavals of the Anthropocene. And we need to develop more sustainable and resilient practices and mechanisms, particularly infrastructure, but also the ethical imagination to adapt and remodel performance. The COVID-19 pandemic needs to be a catalyst for us to rethink our assumptions about theatre, about the world in which we make it, and about its relationship to that world. The paranoia generated by the pandemic, the sense that we must adapt to accommodate the unseen, undetectable presence of a dangerous viral other in our everyday lives, can feed a healthy kind of ecological awareness. And in this, theatre, as a technology for imagining and rehearsing possible worlds, can also serve as part of the solution, offering aesthetic experiences and employing processes that deepen our sense of connectedness with other beings, materials, and objects.